All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to our first quarterly case conference of 2021. I'm Megan Farmer. I'm a genetic counselor and the genetic clinical operations director of Gene Counsel, which is a digital health company founded by genetic counselors. I've also got Ellen Matloff and Danielle Bonadies with me. They're the co-founders of Gene Counsel and kind of our co-hosts. And we have Melanie Hardy, who's our guest speaker today. I'm going to be passing it off to her in just a bit, but I just want to get through a couple of housekeeping things first. So first off, the reason we launched this case series is that the field of genetic counseling is really exploding. And that's a good thing because genetic testing is entering every area of medicine. It's getting bigger and bigger in population health and research studies, as well as direct-to-consumer testing. So we really need more genetic counselors. But it's important that the genetic counseling field represents all of us. So that includes men, people of color, members of the LGBTQ and disability communities, and people who've had kind of varied educational or career backgrounds that are maybe making a career switch. And Melanie's an example of one of these people. She was once a high school teacher and is now a genetic counselor who's worked in multiple fields. So we're really excited to get to know her and her story, and we're going to be accepting questions throughout as well as at the end. So just to give you some additional links in case you're looking for more information after today, if you go to the Gene Counsel website, we actually have a toolkit where we've collected many, many resources. So just some general information about the genetic counseling field. There's podcasts, webinars, videos, books, all sorts of information. We also have the American Board of Genetic Counseling, as well as the National Society of Genetic Counselor websites listed here. And then you can also find us on social media, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram. We're always posting what's going on with the company as well as with the field in general. And we have lots of genetic counselors in our community that you can follow as well. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Melanie. And you should be able to share now, Melanie.
All right, does that look okay?
Looks great.
Okay, awesome. Well, hello everyone. I'm so happy to be here. Hopefully I will provide you with some information that will be beneficial to you. Really my goal today is just to tell you a little bit about my story and then, answer any questions you may have about that or the genetic counseling profession or anything else. Hold on just a second. Let me see if I can get my slides to advance. There we go. Okay. So my path into genetic counseling was definitely not a straight line. This is a second career for me and one that I'm super excited to have transitioned into. Very happy I did. But it took a little bit of, time to get there. So where my journey into genetic counseling began happened while I was teaching. So as Megan mentioned, I was a high school science teacher. So I went to Michigan State University. I was always interested in science. Wasn't 100% sure what I wanted to do with that. Came from a long line of teachers. So that was just sort of, one of the areas that I was always looking at, and ended up teaching high school biology and chemistry for about 9 years, and then forensics for the last year that I was in teaching. And there were so many aspects of teaching that I just loved. I mean, just absolutely loved. The learning part of it. I've always been a person who's really been fascinated by learning more information and just kind of consume information whenever I can get it. The ability to talk to people about science, so that the teaching aspect of teaching was always really fun. I've loved sort of sharing my excitement about the things that I learn about with other people, and trying to make that interesting and fun for them. So being in the classroom, working with students was one of my absolute favorite things about teaching. So kind of helping them to recognize the cool things about the world around them. So there are lots and lots of aspects of teaching that I had lots of enthusiasm for and really loved. there were parts of teaching that were hard, and I've heard teachers describe this as a, what side of the door you're on um, uh, kind of argument. When you're inside the classroom, that's the fun part. That's the great part. It's when you get outside the classroom and have to deal with, budgeting and who's going to pay for lab supplies and, administration and some of those other aspects that can be really tough about teaching. And so I always kind of kept my mind open for the possibility that I might look into another job. But because I was having so much fun being a teacher, I never really had anything that prompted me to go in a different direction. And that changed a little bit when at the end of one of the school years, my department head said, we got this flyer from the Greenwood Genetics Center. They're doing this thing where teachers can come in over the summer and kind of learn about genetics, and it's free, but it's this cool little thing that they're doing. And so I said, what the heck, why not? So I went. I was close enough to the Greenwood Genetics Center in South Carolina that I could drive up there, for a couple weeks in the summer. Absolutely loved it, was so fascinated with everything that I learned, and met a genetic counselor for the first time. Prior to that, I had no idea what that was. And just was so fascinated with the whole thing that I went back for 3 summers. I just loved it. And after that, some things in my life changed. My husband's job moved, so we ended up moving to a totally different area and ended up in a new school, and realized then that teaching was starting to take a turn in terms of I still loved all the stuff in the classroom, but I wasn't loving some of the other parts as much as I had been. And if I wasn't going to change careers now, when am I going to do it? So that's when I kind of made the decision to, I've fell in love with this genetic counseling and all the things that I learned at the Greenwood Genetics Center. And so, why not look into going back to school and really doing this for real. So at that point, I realized I was not ready to become a genetic counselor or to even apply to schools. I realized that my preparation at Michigan State did not include some of the things that you just have to be able to apply to genetic counseling school. I didn't have the statistics. I didn't have what I felt would be high enough grades in the biochemistry. I wanted to kind of go back and relearn a lot of things about genetics that I had learned a decade ago. So I felt a little bit out of the loop on some things. So I talked to a counselor at Georgia Southern University, which was the closest university to me at the time, about doing a post-baccalaureate, just kind of going back, getting some extra hours, retaking some classes that I felt I maybe needed to brush up on. And the counselor said, well, how long do you think you're going to be here? And I said, I don't know, a year or two. He said, well, if you're here, you might as well go ahead and get a master's degree in biology while you're at it. I mean, it would be approximately the same amount of time, 2 years, if you really push yourself. So I said, why not? And I really kind of went in it a little bit lackadaisical, but realized afterward that there were some huge benefits to taking that time that really helped to prepare me for genetic counseling school. So one of the things was the statistics. I had little to no statistics in my bachelor's degree. It really wasn't something that was on my radar at the time. But I took a graduate level biostats course, and it was one of the most beneficial things that I could have done because it really, really helped me, not only through the research that I did at Georgia Southern, but then when I went on to my genetic counseling degree. It also gave me lots of time. So the two things that I spent a lot of time doing, I worked at the Rape Crisis Center of the Coastal Empire, so the center there in Savannah, which was just a phenomenal place. And I, again, recognized afterward how valuable that experience was because I had a chance to do some training to kind of learn about people in crisis and how somebody who's kind of advocating and there to help them can be a benefit to them in that difficult time. So I had, lots of experience, lots of time, lots of training with them that ultimately served me so well in terms of getting into and even doing well within genetic counseling. And then it also gave me time to shadow. And of course, shadowing now looks so different than it did way back when. But I had a chance to work with a few different genetic counselors and one geneticist to kind of learn all about the job. And taking the time to do that really helped to prepare me to be a strong candidate for genetic counseling school. Now, that being said, I'm not saying that the route that I took is the route that everyone needs to take. I don't believe that whatsoever. But I highlight these things because I feel like they really ultimately help me in a variety of ways. And I'll talk a little bit more about those as we go forward. But all that being said, I wanted to kind of pause for a second and see what kinds of questions you have about preparing for a career in genetic counseling. Let's see if I can.
I think the best way to enter the questions would be through the chat feature on the right. So if you want to just type your questions there, we'll moderate that, and feel free to put questions there as Melanie talks if you'd like. And then when she pauses, we'll make sure to bring them up so that she can answer them for us. I think people will probably write some questions as we go forward, Melanie, but if you want to go ahead, then we can circle back on them. Oh, here's one. Someone wanted to know how many hours you volunteered for.
Yeah. So my number might be a little bit intimidating. It was about 750 hours that I volunteered. That I think is probably way more than the average person does going into genetic counseling school, but it was very much a result of the fact that I had 2 solid years to, that I was not applying to genetic counseling school yet. So I had lots and lots of time to volunteer, so I took advantage of that.
And just a question, what is one of the most surprising things you learned through your advocacy experience that has helped you as a genetic counselor?
One of the things that really stuck with me was how somebody who has been assaulted views the person who assaulted them. And oftentimes these are people that they know, maybe a boyfriend or something like that. And it really helped me in the training when they said, you have to be very careful never to say anything sort of negative about the person who assaulted the person you're working with, because it can often cause them to feel like they need to defend that person because they are someone they're familiar with, and so on. So sort of viewing relationships a little bit differently, I think, was one of the most beneficial things that I got from the training and from the experience that I got there, is really viewing things differently than I had originally.
And what are your thoughts on trying to get exposure or volunteer hours for someone who lives, in maybe a rural area versus someone who has maybe access to either lives in a city or is close to one that may have, many genetic counseling centers, and any advice there?
Yeah. So, I have a slide about this later, but some interesting things have come out of the time that we're living in right now. With COVID and the fact that everything shut down and so many things sort of started coming through virtually, we now have some potential solutions to these issues that we may have had before. So people living in rural areas might find some opportunities to access, shadowing virtually, or I don't know, but I'm hoping that some of these advocacy groups and different counseling groups, places where people can get counseling experience, have found ways to work virtually. And I think that ultimately can be to the advantage of somebody who's interested in a career in genetic counseling and is trying to get some of these hours. That being said, I'm still well aware that a lot of centers are still figuring this out as we go. I mean, even though we're almost a year into this, not everybody is super comfortable with telehealth, and they really are sort of just concentrating on taking care of their patients and trying to work with students who want to get this kind of experience is maybe not quite where they're at yet. But I'm hoping that more and more of those opportunities are going to be coming forward and allowing people who maybe would have had trouble with that sort of access in the past to get that access now.
And we've got a few other questions as well. How do you think your teaching experience prepared you for being a genetic counselor?
Yeah. Genetic counseling has been the most perfect fit for as far as a next step from my teaching career, because it still brings forward all of those things that I really loved about teaching in just a little bit different way. So I'm always teaching patients about their test results and what they mean. And so I still am getting to share my enthusiasm for, science and genetics and all those fun things with other people, but in a way that really is important to them, the individual. It's not just general knowledge that I'm sharing, like, oh, look at, how much stuff I know. It's really individualized to the patient. So it's teaching in a little bit different way, but still very much teaching. I'm still very fortunate to work with students too. So I happen to be, affiliated with 2 different programs. I supervise their students. So I still get that piece of it as well. Yeah, I really feel like I'm still doing all the things that I loved, just in a little different way.
Another question came in about references for genetic counseling graduate programs for someone who's transitioning careers. So is it okay to seek references from people who are not affiliated with genetic counseling or science?
Yeah, I think so. When the genetic counseling programs are reviewing all of your information, your application, they're looking at your history. They're looking at the fact that maybe you've been out of school for a little while, or you've been doing other things. And so, they would be understanding of the fact that maybe your references don't look the same as somebody who just came out of school. So I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing. I think it is important to have, professionals, people who can speak to your character, your capability of learning, your work ethic, those kinds of things. So I think it's important to seek appropriate references and good references from that standpoint, but I don't think that they necessarily have to be genetic counselors per se.
And another question, do you think having experience in research could be helpful before someone transitions to a career in genetic counselor? And if so, what areas might line up best?
Yeah, what I found, so when I did my master's in biology at Georgia Southern, my project, I was trying to get it as close to genetics as I possibly could, but I ended up choosing a mentor professor that had a track record of really getting students through, because I was on a timeline. I wanted to spend no more than 2 years in doing that. And I knew that some people might take 5 years to get their master's degree, and I didn't want to be on that track. So I chose my mentor professor who was kind of doing a little bit in terms of genetics, but it wasn't a really hefty genetics focus. So my project ended up being on basically how to kill an invasive species of plant, which, by the way, I did not do very well. But all of the things that I learned about doing research ultimately were beneficial. So even though my project wasn't really genetic-y, driven, there were aspects of it that I could kind of tie in. And even if I couldn't, I still felt that there was huge value to learning how to do that and working the statistics and doing the write-up and all of those things. There's so much that you can learn. So, and I think that GC programs are going to recognize that that kind of experience is really beneficial. If you have a choice in terms of the areas that you can explore and research, awesome. First, find something that you're interested in, because research becomes really difficult if you're doing it on something you don't care about. So I would say start there. But two, yeah, if you can find something in the genetics or even in the counseling realm, do it. That would be great preparation.
Great. There's a couple more questions here. So this question has to do with in looking to apply to graduate programs, do you think that grades or experiences throughout undergrad are more important?
Oh, that's a good question, and maybe variable by GC program. I'm not 100% sure. I think they're both important. It is important to keep the grades as high as possible, but I think that even when the grades aren't straight A's, that the GC programs that I've talked with have been pretty interested in people with good experience, those who really show that they're doing what they can to prepare themselves well for success in genetic counseling.
And what was your favorite part of the actual training program? Was it specific classes, clinic opportunities, volunteer opportunities?
Yeah. Honestly, my favorite part of my genetic counseling program was my classmates. I still am super close with them. We still meet on a routine basis. We're just like siblings. So I just love them. And I think that my genetic counseling program kind of fostered that family feel. So that worked really, really well for me. Different programs have kind of different ways that they sort of focus, but because most of them are fairly small still, you tend to get really close with the people that you are there with. That being said, I had really great experiences throughout. I mean, there were several classes that I will remember for a long period of time because we had interesting professors or really cool other people in the class that, made it fun, or, all kinds of things like that. I will remember my rotations forever. I still talk with a lot of the supervisors that I had because they were just phenomenal, really caring people. The volunteer opportunity. So one of the things that we did in genetic counseling school was we volunteered with the Down Syndrome Association of Greensboro. And I had so much fun in that experience that I've continued to volunteer with the Down Syndrome Society in Richmond. So I've just continued on. I've really enjoyed all of that. I really liked all of it, which is maybe a cheesy way of answering that question, but I really did.
So this is a pretty broad one, but what advice do you have for people looking to make a career change?
Well,
to genetic counseling.
Transition point for the next thing that I'm going to talk about, because yeah, let me go through a couple more slides and then I'll maybe jump back to that question. Yeah, so this is what I was talking about. So taking the time to become a strong candidate for genetic counseling school is really about finding out if it's right for you. So if you're looking to make a career change to genetic counseling, I think the best piece of advice I could give you is all of those kind of boxes that you have to check off to really just be able to apply, having the right prerequisite classes, getting some degree, some amount of counseling experience, getting your references and writing a good essay for your application. All of those, if they feel like check boxes and that's all they are to you, then maybe rethink your career change, because being a genetic counselor is really about loving the things that you do when you're a genetic counselor. And there are a million ways to be a genetic counselor. So it's not necessarily about sitting in a room with a patient, that's not always what it looks like. But these things should be exciting to you. They should be great experiences for you. You should be taking advantage of the chance to learn, because all of those things that are the check boxes on your application are really opportunities. And so that would be maybe the strongest piece of advice, is to make sure that those are exciting to you, they are beneficial to you, you're enjoying doing them. Because if you can't say those things, then you're really probably not going to be the strongest candidate for genetic counseling, and you may not enjoy the career once you get there. So you really take advantage of those. Some of the things that I learned in terms of, advice for interviewing and preparing yourself for getting into genetic counseling school is, number one, the programs want to know that you are certain that this is the career for you. There are limited slots, and there are limited, we have a great need for more and more genetic counselors, but we want to make sure that we're putting the best people forth to continue to make the genetic counseling profession as strong as it possibly can be. So that's where, like, preparing yourself appropriately is the best thing that you can do. So talking to people who have genetic conditions, talking to their family members, learning about how genetic conditions can impact people, reading about them, watching webinars and podcasts, and doing the things that you can to really make sure that you understand the impacts of genetics on everyday people, and find ways that you have interest in that you have excitement about that. Take advantage of those counseling opportunities, and, learn pieces from those that will ultimately serve you when you get into genetic counseling school. I completely lucked out when I was interviewing at one of the programs. So one of the interviewers, I had 4 different interviews in a row. And one of the people, I sat down and he said, "What are you reading right now?" And completely by chance, I was reading a book about a guy who had cancer and what that meant to him. And it was just one of those things that I was so lucky to be able to pull out of my back pocket and talk all about. But for him, it was a demonstration that I was taking the time to learn about people impacted by genetic conditions. Or I don't know if his was genetic, but excuse me. So it's all of those bits and pieces that you do to prepare yourself for applying to genetic counseling that ultimately become the tidbits that you get to talk about when you're in the interview process. When the interviewer is really trying to get down to, do you like this stuff? Do you want to do this as a permanent career? Do you have interest in helping people, in genetics, in continuing to learn throughout your lifetime? These are some of the key tenets of being a genetic counselor. You have to be prepared for all those things. And if the interviewer doesn't sense that you're really, ready and interested in doing those kinds of things, then, you're probably not going to be scored as high as somebody who really is. So take the time as you're preparing to apply to really get something out of those experiences. Yeah. And so with that said, does anyone have any other questions about genetic counseling school, the interview process, anything else?
You actually touched on some of it, but there were questions about just general advice for interviewing. And I think you made great points, just kind of drawing on some of those experiences that people are doing anyway as they apply.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing about the interview process is it's important to kind of view it as going two ways. So it's not only about the program learning about you and whether you're a good fit for their program, but also you doing the same to them. Again, when I interviewed, it was way back before the pandemic, so it was all in person. And, we had opportunities to walk around the campus, to, eat dinner with their current students, to meet with some of the professors or the supervisors. And I think a lot of that is happening virtually now. So they're trying to kind of recreate the experience. But I found that it was exceptionally beneficial to me in the interview process to really get a sense of the school, the program, how do they prepare their students, and all of them do a good job. All of them, any person who graduates from genetic counseling is well prepared to be a successful genetic counselor. They all do a great job. They just do it a little differently from one program to the other. So I found that some programs were super competitive, like they might have an award system for students, and they might be thrown into classes with the med students, and they are quizzed routinely on their facts about this disease or that disease. And it's sort of it would be a spectacular program for somebody who's super competitive, and it like learns in that kind of environment. Knowing myself and that I have a tendency to kind of get stressed out in certain situations, I knew that wouldn't be a good fit for me. So those were not the programs that I was as interested in. So it's little things like that you have to really kind of evaluate. What does this program look like? What kinds of things do they do to prepare their students? Even questions like, in doing your rotations, which now that everything is very virtual, it may be different, but when things are more in person, how much traveling do you have to do to get to your rotations? Do you have a car? Do you have the ability to stay at somebody's house? If your rotation is several hours from your school, what kinds of expenses are going to come along with going to this particular program? I had applied to one and very stupidly didn't bother to look at tuition prices. And when I found out how high they were, I was like, whoa, this is not one I'm going to be able to go to. So you just have to think of all of those parts of the school that are important to you, and that a lot of that comes out in the interview process.
Melanie, this question is related to kind of getting prepared related to genetic counseling and maybe some of the ethics that come into play in the field, and recommendations for articles, books, or journals that could help a student prepare. For the
Ethics that come into play?
The question is for ethics and genetic counseling. I'll put in just a plug for, we have a resource on My Gene Counsel that has a whole list of them, because often I can't think of them at the top of my head. But if I go through a list, I'm like, oh yeah, these are some good ones. So that's always a go-to resource for students if you're looking for one. But if you have ones that come to mind, I'm sure they would love to hear it too.
Yeah, I mean,
the beginnings in the chat too.
Great. Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, I mean, I don't have like a go-to list of, resources that I would go to for like ethics, like reading about ethics or anything like that. But if an ethical problem ever comes up, there are two places where I would I would be most likely to go. So National Society of Genetic Counselors, NSGC, has it's like an ethics committee where you can submit questions, and they have a committee that sort of weighs in on these things. A lot of academic centers will have an ethics committee themselves. So if any kind of ethical conundrum comes up, you can always go to them for some guidance and advice. And those are the places where I would, kind of go to for sort of the big issues. Smaller things, sort of like ethical, we need to think of this from multiple standpoints and how the moves that we make are impacting various groups. I think those come up, and a lot of it is just like talking with your colleagues and all of us kind of weighing in on that sort of thing. So I don't really have any more concrete than that.
And would you have an opinion on whether somebody should always go straight from undergrad to grad school for genetic counseling or take a gap year?
I think it can be done either way. I really do. I mean, I've seen so many super successful people who just come straight out of undergrad. They've taken the time to really prepare themselves. So, they've done maybe some research, they've done all of their volunteering and other things that they need to do to apply ahead of time. So they're strong candidates just coming right out. I think that there's so much value to having some gap years though, as well. I mean, I've seen people really use that time in very smart ways to prepare themselves. It's really about preparing yourselves. It's not about how quickly you apply.
I'm going to present the next question about your work in crisis counseling. And I think this is a common suggestion that people make for individuals who are thinking about becoming genetic counselors, that this is a great way to get experience. But this individual is wondering if that's a good fit for her personally because of maybe the context of the topics that come up, and if there's any other way to get good experience other than going that route. This is a great
question. Absolutely. I had the same fear prior to when I found the Rape Crisis Center in Savannah. And I just ended up going in and talking to their director and saying, I'm full disclosure, I need experience in counseling. I feel like this might be a way for me to do it. I'm really worried about the subject matter. And that was the most helpful conversation I ever could have had, because it alerted her to how I was feeling about it. She was able to kind of allay some of my concerns, but she was also able to make sure that when there were certain cases that I felt would be a little bit harder for me to handle, that those were going to other people who felt more prepared for that, and so there were ways that I could volunteer with them that would keep me comfortable, keep me getting the experience that I was looking for, but ultimately serving, the people that they served in the best possible way. So I think have a conversation and see if that's the right fit for you. But yeah, there are plenty of other ways to get experience. I mean, a lot of people will do like crisis hotlines, working with Planned Parenthood. I never looked into all of the various ways to do it, but I know that people have found other ways too.
And I think some people have also gone in different directions where they're just looking for opportunities to kind of mentor or kind of advocate for people. So even Big Brother, Big Sister type organizations where the crisis element's not there, but they still get practice listening to people and advocating for them. So I'm hoping there are more and more opportunities now. And like Melanie said, maybe more virtual opportunities too.
Mm-hmm.
So many questions coming in. I don't know if you went to NSGC this last time, Melanie, or maybe a previous conference, but did you have a favorite session?
I have actually been to every NSGC conference since I was in school. So I'm a big proponent of that. This past year, gosh, there were a lot of really, really good talks. Maybe one of my favorites, because it has so much to do with what I'm doing right now, was the debate on expanded carrier screening and how big expanded carrier screens should be, how big these panels should be. I thought it was so well organized, really, really well put together. Yeah, it was a really good one. So, and speaking of that, so I'll kind of like go forward a few slides and talk a little bit about what I'm doing right now. So after I graduated from genetic counseling school, I totally by chance ended up in Richmond, Virginia. I'm from Michigan, my husband's from Georgia, and his job landed there. So did I. And I ended up in an MFM clinic, maternal fetal medicine clinic in Richmond, that prior to being hired, they had a nurse who was kind of doing the genetic counseling, you know, taking pedigree. She was doing a spectacular job, having not been trained in genetic counseling and just trying to put it together as best she could. But that balanced with her nursing duties were just a lot to balance. And so they finally decided to hire a genetic counselor. I was the first one in straight out of grad school, and then another counselor came in very shortly after I did, also straight out of grad school. So the two of us together kind of put together a genetics program for this clinic. And we were there for a few years, and another counselor came in later, also straight out of grad school. So we were all just a bunch of kind of new people figuring it out as we went, but it was amazing experience. I got to see all kinds of prenatal cases. So we were talking to mostly women who were pregnant. Not very often did we see preconception patients, but often they were coming in for ultrasounds where we might see some anomalies with the way the baby is developing, or they might have genetic testing that showed an increased risk for certain conditions, et cetera. And it was just a really, really great place to learn. And the fact that we were kind of trying to develop this program as we went along meant that we were really kind of taking a deep dive into all of the things that you really need to consider in putting a program together. But I really enjoyed it. I had always liked prenatal when I was in school. I didn't really have a strong feeling that I had to end up in a prenatal job or anything, but I wasn't sad when that was the job that I found. And so it really prepared me quite well for what I'm doing now. When I was kind of ready to move on from there, I actually didn't have any thought whatsoever about moving to a telehealth job. That was not on my radar. And I was quite nervous about it when I first started with JScreen. I kind of just happened to find, you know, their job application online. And I think we were all a little bit nervous because all of the people that work for JScreen were a fairly small bunch. They're all there in Atlanta at Emory University, just off campus. And everyone had worked from an office. So even though we're serving patients across the US, we had been working in telehealth right from the beginning. Everyone was working from the same spot. And there are lots of benefits to being around each other on a daily basis. But since I was way up here in Richmond, Virginia, not close to Atlanta, you know, there was a lot of question about, like, can this really be done from a distance? And the genetic counselor who was there at the time said, absolutely, don't worry about it. It will be totally fine. And we figured it out. And every genetic counselor we've hired since has been a distance from Atlanta. We're all across the East Coast, really. But this job was kind of a perfect change for me because I didn't realize what it would be like to work in telehealth. And now I can't imagine doing anything else. I love it. Love working from home. Love being able to, you know, have my dog in the room with me and, you know, all of those fun things. I'm more introverted, so I don't necessarily need to be around a ton of people all the time. So that makes it a good fit for me as well. But it really, also took that skill set that I felt like I got from the MFM clinic, learning all about those things, you know, that you have to deal with in prenatal genetic counseling, and flipped it on its head a little bit, right? So I'll take a moment and kind of tell you a little bit about how JScreen works. So you can find us, jscreen.com. JScreen started in late 2013, and the idea was that a lot of people who want carrier screening, so this is the kind of screening where, for the most part, if you and your partner both carry the same genetic condition, then there's an increased chance of having a child affected with that condition. So we can test both partners prior to pregnancy, ideally, to see if they carry the same things. Those that don't, you know, go forth and multiply and can get pregnant naturally and don't have so many worries. Those that do, we have some other reproductive options for them to be able to have healthy children. The tricky thing, though, is that most people who access expanded carrier screening do so after they become pregnant, which really limits the options that they have to have a healthy child if they happen to be one of these carrier couples. So ideally, we wanted to access those individuals before they became pregnant. And what that really entailed was making the patient, you know, kind of advocating for the patient to advocate for themselves. So instead of the doctor, once the patient is pregnant, offering expanded carrier screening in a doctor's office, what JScreen decided was to have the patient register for testing. We still get a doctor's order. It's still doctor ordered testing. It's not direct to consumer. But we do that part for them. They can test in the comfort of their own home. Saliva sample is a possibility now. And then we do the genetic counseling on the back end and go over the results, help them understand it. And then if they have, you know, if they happen to be a carrier couple, or if they are at increased risk, reproductive risk, then we can connect them with resources in their own area to be able to mitigate that risk, to figure out how they want to have healthy children, you know, if such thing is necessary. But at that point, they're knowledgeable about their genetic testing results so they can make informed decisions. So it's just sort of taking all the things I had been doing in the MFM clinic and flipping it on its head just a little bit in a way that allows us to access preconception patients, which is the ideal time for this kind of testing. And, you know, we're proud to say that well over 90% of our patients are still pre-pregnancy, which is the best time for us to access them. So that is kind of the JScreen model. And this is a look at our website. So, you know, you're welcome to, you know, peruse around, and anybody can access this. We test anyone 18 to 45 are the reproductive ages that we're eligible for testing. You know, anybody who is interested, although we are JScreen, we market to a Jewish community. You don't have to be Jewish to access our testing. Anybody, any background is welcome. So that's that. You'll also see right up there at the top, we have cancer screening available. So we are working on a cancer program and just getting that off the ground. So that's a new initiative for us, and where, you know, we've got a lot of work to do, but we are, you know, just getting ourselves up and running. So looking forward in the throughout this year to really make some headway in that space as well. Yeah, and specific to my job, I mean, this has been just one of the coolest experiences because it's such a unique job. I've never found anyone who has a job exactly like mine, but it kind of checks all of my boxes personally. You know, there's a ton of autonomy, a lot of independence. You know, we have patients who, because of the way that we're doing our testing and our testing model, you know, 9 to 5 hours don't always work the best for patients to be able to get their genetic counseling. So you know, we have late night hours, which means I might start late, end late. I might work on weekends a little bit, and that works out great for me. It opens some other hours throughout my week, and I love it. And then I've had some opportunities for leadership. So I'm the assistant director of our genetic counseling team, which I've really enjoyed being able to do that. We're helping underrepresented minorities. We've had tons of opportunities for collaboration. So research projects with other groups, you know, all kinds of things there. I've had lots of opportunities for professional development, a lot of involvement in other societies that ultimately benefits us. So I work a lot with the National Society of Genetic Counselors, and I've done a lot with the American Board of Genetic Counseling, working on committees with them. And so, for example, with NSGC, I just rolled off as chair of the licensure subcommittee, and being able to talk directly with the head of government relations at NSGC helps me a lot, because a big part of doing telehealth means I have to be licensed everywhere. So that's a big part of keeping up with that is really, really important. And I feel like we offer an innovative service. You know, we're doing things differently than what you would see, you know, in your typical doctor's office. But I feel like it's ultimately to the benefit of our patients. So I'm really excited about all that. And I still have opportunities for teaching, working with different programs and things. So it checks all of my boxes. Yeah, so I know we got more questions, so I'm happy to take the rest of the time to kind of dive into those.
A couple questions we can kind of tie together about telehealth. How do you return carrier screening results by telehealth? Do they get genetic counseling at that time? And also, do you feel like there's challenges kind of developing rapport, connecting with patients by telehealth as opposed to in person?
Yeah. So the first question, yes, all the results come through and we go through a genetic counseling session. So generally speaking, negative results just get released. So the patient gets a secure email, they get their results, and we have some information about what it means to be a negative test result. And they just sort of read that. Everyone else gets genetic counseling. We do split, so the lab genetic counselors help us with our volume because, like I said, JScreen is a fairly small group of people that makes it all work. We keep the more high-risk cases in-house, so carrier couples, people that they themselves have been identified to have a genetic condition, strong family history of something that we need to get more information about, anything that requires maybe a little bit more discussion, a little bit more workup on the back end for us, we keep those in-house. And basically when the results are ready, the patient gets an email that says your results are ready, click here to make an appointment. They can choose phone or video, so it's up to the patient how they want to access us. And then the consults are fairly short, depending on how much stuff we have to talk about. You know, they 10 minutes all the way up to 30 minutes. And usually that's plenty of time for us to get everything. And then we summarize everything we've talked about, send the results and the consult letter to both the patient and their ordering provider. So the patient also has all the information in words as well, but it works out really well. And to the question about building a rapport, there are differences in telehealth. You know, I'll say that it's not the same as in person. And I talk a lot with my students about the importance of honing your skills in telehealth. So like when I'm in person, I can see the person is nervous because their leg is shaking. I can't see that on a video. You know, I can see a person is getting frustrated with me because they're gripping the handles of their chair. I can't see that by video. So you have to find ways to gather that information in a different way. So you just kind of build a little bit different skill. It's still the same set of skills that any genetic counselor has in their toolbox. We all are trained with the same set of skills. However, you're honing them in different ways. So if I sense that a patient is having trouble with something. So maybe I hear a sniffle, or they're really not talking and they had been talking before, or they seem distracted, or whatever my cues might be. I need to learn to pull that information out of them, right? I need some feedback about how they're doing. So I ask more questions. I ask questions in a different way. I use silence. That is one of my key tools. I am really good at not talking because not talking becomes awkward fast, and a patient will start telling you a lot if you just don't talk. So there are these skills that you learn to build when you're in telehealth. So ultimately, I would say I still can build rapport. I still can do all the things that I could do in person. I just have to do them in a little bit different way.
This question is related to the average patient that comes to you. Are they coming to you with a concern that they have about a genetic condition in their family, or are they just coming to learn about genetic disorders in general?
Yeah, we get a mix. So a lot of people, especially as they start planning for pregnancy, they they learn that this is one of the tests that they might be interested in doing, and different doctors will offer different panels. So how comprehensive the testing their doctor is going to offer them may differ from what we offer. We offer a pretty comprehensive panel. It's 226 conditions on our panel right now. A lot of our patients, so historically in the Jewish community, there was a push back even in the 70s to do Tay-Sachs testing. That was something that we saw a lot of babies born in the Jewish community with Tay-Sachs, and there were a lot of different efforts to try to figure out how we can reduce that number, because it's a very severe disease. So there's sort of a community knowledge that carrier testing is an important thing. And, a lot of Jewish moms will push their kids, you're reaching reproductive age, it's your turn, you need to do this testing. So we have a really, really high volume of people that come through because their friends and family have recommended it to them. Some of them come through because their doctors know about us and recommend it to them. Some people certainly do come through with family history. Oftentimes at this point, the family histories that we see are, oh, my cousin got this testing and it turns out she carries cystic fibrosis, and I want to know if I carry that one. And so, well, that's on our panel. We can help you with that. But ultimately, we're also testing for a bunch of other things as well, so the patient gets lots of results.
And Melanie, do you have an email? It might be on another slide where people can reach out if they have questions specifically for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me kind of go to that. Whoops, there we go. This is something I tell to everyone. If you get into this job and you're bored, you're doing it wrong. There are way too many really awesome ways to be a genetic counselor. And I've kind of mentioned this a little bit, but things have changed a little bit because of the pandemic. But here you go. We'll just leave that up there for everyone while we go through the rest of the questions.
I'm going to drop it in the chat as well.
Yeah.
You just have another minute or two. Megan, do you want to share the info about the toolkit that we have so everyone can see it? It was also in the chat.
It's in the chat. And then Melanie, if you don't mind, I'll share my screen so I can share the tool.
Perfect.
And I know some of you might have joined us a little bit late. We've had such a great crowd and really fantastic questions. So thank you for everybody joining today. But just to review, this was our first quarterly case conference of this year. We're going to have obviously 3 more. We're going to have more fantastic speakers like Melanie. We're going to have potentially cool cases to share with you, just interesting topics in genetic counseling so you can learn more about the field and be prepared as you decide whether to apply, or if you have upcoming interviews, you'll have really great things to talk about. And so here at the top, you'll see the genetic counseling toolkit. We had several questions just about books, movies, podcasts, websites, and the list is very well organized so that you can find additional sources of information there. And I just want to, again, thank Melanie for her time today. I think it was really, really helpful just to kind of learn about her experiences and get her advice. and we hope you'll join us for our future conferences. Anyone else from the My Gene Counsel team or Melanie want to add anything there?
No, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure, and I look forward to emails. If you have any questions, please send them to me. I'm happy to help out where I can.
Yeah, great questions, everyone. It was a pleasure to talk with you, and thank you, Melanie, for participating. It was a great overview, and so exciting to hear where you came from and the work that you're doing now.
Thanks.
Absolutely. Thanks for being with us, everybody. It was a great crowd, and we're excited that you're excited about the field of genetic counseling. And I think Melanie did a great job of showing how it can be just a fantastic field.